The champagne flute slipped from my fingers, crystals scattering across the polished floor, as the words echoed through the grand hall. "This is the family embarrassment we have to tolerate," my new daughter-in-law, Vanessa, announced, with a sweet smile that cut like a blade. Her manicured hand barely touched my shoulder, but her voice carried clearly over the orchestra's music. 200 guests froze. The Mitchell family estate, overlooking Chesapeake Bay, glowed under chandeliers and candlelight, but all eyes turned to me, the 56-year-old woman standing alone in a navy dress that suddenly felt far too simple for the moment. My son Daniel looked stricken on the dance floor, caught between his bride and his mother, unable to move. A hush spread across the tables. I could feel the weight of whispers pressing against my back. For a heartbeat, I considered retreating into the shadows, the way I had trained myself to do for the last 15 years. But then something happened that no one expected. Robert Mitchell, Vanessa's father, turned pale. His champagne glass hung suspended halfway to his lips. His gaze locked on my face, with a recognition so sharp I felt it in my chest. "Eleanor Carter," he whispered, almost to himself, though in the stillness of the hall, the name seemed to travel further than he intended. The sound of my own name, spoken like a revelation, jolted me. I had spent so long cultivating invisibility that hearing it pronounced with awe rather than dismissal unsettled me. Robert's tuxedo collar seemed suddenly too tight. His wife Patricia clutched his arm, confused by his sudden change of color. A murmur rippled through the guests as Robert stepped forward, still staring. "Wait, aren't you the woman from the acquisition meeting years ago?" His voice carried the disbelief of a man who thought he had buried an old ghost. "Aren't you the mysterious investor who bought my company?" Vanessa's smug expression faltered. She looked from her father to me, confusion spreading across her perfect features. Patricia's diamond bracelet flashed as her hand flew to her throat, her mind clearly racing to catch up with whatever Robert had just realized. I lowered my eyes, but inside me a storm was breaking open. 15 years of carefully hidden truths were teetering on the edge of exposure. The music stopped. Guests shifted in their seats. For the first time in decades, I was not invisible. I was standing under the light of recognition, and every instinct told me nothing about my life would ever be the same after tonight. To understand why Robert Mitchell's words sent a chill through the hall, I need to take you back to a life most people never knew I lived. My name is Eleanor Carter, though most people in Maryland know me simply as Ellie. For the last 15 years, I've been the quiet single mother, the widow who made ends meet, the woman people thought had just enough to get by, but never more. That version of me was real, but it was only half the truth. I grew up in Annapolis and married Michael Carter when I was 24. He was brilliant, a man whose mind thrived on building and improving. Together, we shared a dream of stability and family. We had one son, Daniel, who became my entire world. When Michael was killed in a car accident 2 decades ago, I thought my story had ended. At 36, I stood alone, holding my son's hand, staring into a future I had no idea how to navigate. What no one knew was that Michael had been working on a project for years, a design for a compact generator chip that dramatically reduced energy loss in small electronic devices. He believed it could transform battery life across multiple industries. I remember the night he told me, eyes glowing in the dim light of his workshop, that maybe, just maybe, we were sitting on something big. After his death, I nearly let it die with him. Grief made it impossible to think clearly. But Daniel was 10, and I knew I had to fight for his future. I worked with Michael's old colleagues to patent the design. In 2010, I sold the rights for $24 million. To the outside world, I said it was a settlement from his company. Daniel believed it was just enough to keep us safe, enough to cover school tuition and the mortgage. That was the story I told him. That was the mask I wore. But behind the mask, I became a student of the markets. I devoured books on investing, studied late into the night, built spreadsheets, and tracked every cent. I started small, blue chip stocks, mutual funds. Then I moved to real estate on the edges of Baltimore, buying properties before neighborhoods revived. I partnered with tech startups in DC when I recognized innovation. Step by step, dollar by dollar, the fortune grew. By the time Daniel graduated college, the 24 million had become over 200 million. By 2020, when the pandemic reshaped the economy, my portfolio was valued at nearly 800 million. The widow people pitied was, in truth, one of the quietest and most strategic investors in the Mid-Atlantic. And then came Mitchell Dynamics, Robert's company. On paper, it was crumbling under the weight of bad loans. Beneath the surface, I saw potential. So, I bought it through a shell corporation, sat silently at a boardroom table while attorneys signed the papers, and walked away without fanfare. Robert never knew it was me until tonight. That's why, as I stood at my son's wedding reception with broken glass at my feet, his recognition hit like thunder. Because the mask I'd worn for 15 years had slipped, and the world was about to see who Eleanor Carter really was. The morning after the wedding, Daniel showed up at my townhouse in Annapolis, still in his suit pants and white shirt, looking like he had not slept. His eyes carried that restless fire I had seen when he was a boy, the look he wore whenever he felt betrayed. "Mom," he said without even sitting down, "what did Vanessa's father mean last night? Why did he look at you like that?" I poured him coffee, buying myself a moment, but the bitterness in his tone told me it was not a question I could brush aside. He set his hands flat on my kitchen table, knuckles white. "Tell me the truth. Are you some kind of investor? Was that you at his board meeting?" I wanted to protect him the way I always had, but the weight of silence was pressing down harder than ever. I opened my mouth, searching for words, when his phone buzzed. Vanessa's name lit up the screen. Daniel hesitated, then answered on the speaker. "Honey," Vanessa's voice chirped, "too bright, too practiced. I thought maybe the three of us could have lunch today, just us. There are family things we should talk about now that we're married." Her tone was honeyed, but I could hear the steel beneath. Vanessa was not calling for reconciliation. She was probing. After the call ended, Daniel sat back, his jaw clenched. "She knows something. She wants answers too." He ran a hand through his hair, the way he used to when struggling with homework as a boy. "Mom, please, don't make me find out from her." I reached across the table, but he pulled back. The rejection cut deeper than I expected. "Daniel, there are things I needed to explain, but you have to trust me. Timing matters." He let out a hollow laugh. "Timing? You had 15 years. Then he stood and left, leaving the coffee untouched. That afternoon, Vanessa's text arrived. "Margaret, thank you for agreeing to lunch. There are important matters we need to discuss." I had never agreed, but the message was phrased as if I had. That was Vanessa's skill. She knew how to bend words into obligations. I stared at the screen, the corners of my mouth tightening. Vanessa was cleverer than I had given her credit for. She was not only curious, she was calculating. She had tasted something at the wedding reception, some hint of a truth hidden beneath my plain dress and careful smile, and she was determined to dig it out, no matter the cost. As I folded the phone shut, a chill crept through me. For the first time since Michael's death, I realized my greatest opponent might not be a businessman in a boardroom. It might be the woman who had just married my son. The restaurant Vanessa chose was not accidental. It was the kind of place with velvet curtains and polished oak floors, the kind where senators met discreetly and deals worth millions were whispered over glasses of Bordeaux. When Daniel and I arrived, Vanessa was already seated at a corner table, with a perfect view of the entire room. She wore a tailored cream suit and pearls that I doubted were family heirlooms. She smiled as we approached, but her green eyes glittered with calculation. "Margaret, Daniel, thank you for coming," she said, rising to kiss us both on the cheek. Her voice was warm, but every syllable felt rehearsed. I thought it would be nice to celebrate our new family bond properly. The waiter appeared immediately, pouring a bottle of wine I recognized from a magazine spread. $500 a glass at least. Vanessa lifted her glass and tilted it toward me. To family. I let the toast pass without comment. Daniel shifted uneasily in his chair. He had never been comfortable in places like this. Vanessa leaned forward, folding her hands with a serenity that looked practiced. I spoke with Daddy last night, she began casually. He remembered something very interesting. Years ago, during the acquisition of Mitchell Dynamics, there was a woman in the room who barely spoke, who deferred to her attorneys. Daddy said she had a presence though, quiet but commanding. She paused, her gaze fixed on me. Funny thing, Margaret, he swears that woman looked remarkably like you. Daniel's head snapped toward me, eyes wide. I kept my expression calm, sipping the wine, though it tasted like vinegar on my tongue. The photo quality isn't great, Vanessa continued, sliding her phone across the table. On the screen was a grainy picture from a business article 3 years old. Behind a row of lawyers and executives, a woman's face was partially visible. Navy dress, pearl necklace. Purse held with quiet poise. Daniel's breath caught. Mom, he whispered. I set the phone down without flinching. That's quite a coincidence, I said softly. Ikithe, isn't it? Vanessa replied, her smile tightening. Coincidences do happen, of course. Like how Daddy's company sold for $800 million, then somehow rebounded under mysterious ownership. Or how someone has managed to remain completely invisible, despite sitting on a fortune. Daniel looked at me like the world was tilting beneath his feet. Vanessa leaned back, satisfied with the tension she had created. She thought she had cornered me. What she didn't know was that I had been playing this game far longer than she had been alive. And in chess, the queen never reveals her power until the board is ready. I did not sleep the night after that lunch. Vanessa's voice lingered like smoke in my ears, her green eyes shining with the hunger of someone who had smelled blood in the water. She thought she had discovered my secret. What she didn't realize was that curiosity could be dangerous when pointed in the wrong direction. At 8 the next morning, I called James Harding, my financial advisor of 15 years. By noon, I was in his Baltimore office, a paneled room lined with leather-bound ledgers and walls of glass that looked over the harbor. James had always been a quiet man, loyal, discreet, the kind of person who never asked unnecessary questions. Eleanor, he said, polishing his glasses as he studied the folders I had requested. Why the sudden interest in the Mitchell family's accounts? Because I think my new daughter-in-law is digging into mine, I replied. That made him pause. He flipped open the first file, brows tightening. Well, you were right to ask. Their financial situation is fragile. Very fragile. He walked me through the records. Robert Mitchell's estate was mortgaged nearly to the limit. Patricia's lifestyle, designer gowns, charity galas, European vacations, was funded through loans and credit lines. Their investment portfolio had been drained over the past 3 years, replaced by desperate short-term borrowing. They've been living like royalty on borrowed time, James said gravely. Honestly, without the consulting fees your company provides Robert, they'd have already gone under. I leaned back, absorbing the truth. So that was the reality beneath their glittering estate. And Vanessa, she had married my son believing she was trading into security, unaware that the foundation beneath her family's fortune was already cracking. James, I said quietly, what about her? Any unusual activity? He tapped another folder. Yes. Vanessa has opened multiple new credit accounts recently, expensive ones. She's also hired a private investigation firm out of Washington. They specialize in asset tracing and shell companies. If they're digging, it's because she's paying them to. My pulse quickened. So it was true. Vanessa wasn't just curious, she was building a case. James closed the folder and looked at me carefully. You've spent years protecting your privacy, Eleanor. But if she pushes hard enough, the structures you've built could be unraveled. My advice? Don't wait to react. Get ahead of her. I stood gathering the files, my reflection sharp in the glass window behind him. Vanessa thought she had cornered me, but she had only drawn me out of hiding. If she wanted a war, I would not fight it on her terms. For the first time in years, I felt the old steel rise inside me. I had built an empire from ashes. I could dismantle a greedy girl's ambitions just as easily. I knew they would come. It was only a matter of time. So I prepared. I set out a modest cheese plate, poured an ordinary bottle of wine, and arranged the files James had given me in a neat stack beside my chair. When Daniel knocked that evening, Vanessa was right beside him, clutching a leather portfolio as if it were armor. "Mom," Daniel began carefully, "thank you for agreeing to talk. Things have gotten complicated." Vanessa sat down without waiting for me to offer. She smoothed her cream skirt and looked around my modest living room with faint disdain. "Margaret, I think we need to start over. There's no reason for family to be working at cross purposes." Her voice was all honey, but her eyes betrayed impatience. She opened her portfolio with deliberate precision. Inside were typed documents, outlines, and draft contracts. "I've been thinking about our future," she continued smoothly. "A family foundation would make sense, something that allows us to manage wealth together while giving back to the community. It could be overseen by a board of trustees, you, me, Daniel, and eventually our children. Decisions would be shared equally." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. He looked tired, older than 32. "Vanessa, maybe we're moving too fast," but she silenced him with a gentle pat on his hand. "This is about protecting all of us, transparency, collaboration, family unity." I let her speak. When she was finished, I reached for my folder and laid 3 papers on the coffee table. "These," I said calmly, "are invoices from a private investigation firm you hired 2 weeks ago. They specialize in tracing corporate assets. These," I added, sliding out another page, "are consultation notes from a law office that handles family trust disputes. And these," I tapped the last document, "show 3 new credit lines you opened this month, financed on the assumption that you'd soon have access to significant assets." Vanessa's face drained of color. Daniel blinked, his confusion turning to shock. "Vanessa, is this true?" She swallowed, trying to recover. "I was just trying to understand the situation, to plan responsibly." "No," I interrupted softly. "You were preparing to take control." Daniel's hands clenched. "You investigated my mother?" Vanessa's composure cracked, her voice rising. "I was protecting us. If she's hiding millions, don't you think we deserve to know? Don't you think we should share it?" I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence hang heavy. "Daniel," I said quietly, "the woman you married didn't come to this family for love. She came for leverage." The room froze. Daniel stared at his wife, his faith breaking apart piece by piece. And for the first time, Vanessa looked afraid. The summons came 3 days later. A formal request for mediation at a Washington, D.C. law firm. The moment I saw the letterhead, Harrison and Webb, I knew Vanessa had escalated the fight. She had money on the line now, and desperation is a dangerous fuel. The conference room was cold, paneled in dark mahogany, with a long table that could have seated 20. On one side sat Vanessa in a charcoal suit, her posture stiff, her lawyer Marcus Webb beside her with files stacked like weapons. Patricia and Robert Mitchell were there too, Robert's expression tight, his wife clutching her pearls as though they might anchor her. On my side sat James Harding, calm as ever, and Daniel, whose face betrayed sleepless nights and hollow regret. He looked at his wife, then at me, like a man caught between 2 collapsing worlds. Marcus Webb cleared his throat. "Let's be clear why we're here. My client has discovered that Mrs. Carter has concealed substantial assets while allowing her son's wife and in-laws to suffer financial hardship. We are prepared to argue this constitutes a pattern of deception and manipulation." James didn't flinch. "Mrs. Carter's investments are legal, documented, and private. What your client perceives as hardship stems from her family's reckless spending, not from any obligation of my client's." Vanessa leaned forward, voice controlled but sharp. "This isn't about reckless spending. It's about family. You've been manipulating lives while pretending to be someone else. That isn't just deception, it's betrayal. I let her words settle before answering. Vanessa, I have never manipulated anyone. I bought struggling companies, saved jobs, and built stability. I maintained privacy because not every fortune needs to be paraded through charity galas and magazines. That is not betrayal. That is discretion. Robert finally spoke, his voice hoarse. But you bought my company. You let me believe I failed. I met his gaze without blinking. Robert, you did fail. I kept the company alive so your employees could keep their homes. Your pride doesn't erase your mistakes. The silence that followed was thick. Marcus slid a document across the table. We propose a family trust. Mrs. Carter contributes a significant portion of her assets. A board, including my clients, manages it. Fair, transparent, cooperative. I studied the paper, then pushed it back toward him. No. Vanessa's mask was slipped, anger flashing in her eyes. Then what do you propose? I leaned forward, my voice calm, but sharp enough to cut glass. 72 hours. Withdraw every investigation. End every regulatory complaint. Cease every attempt to trace my holdings. Do that, and I'll make you an offer. $5 million, one time, to walk away and never contact me or my son again. The room erupted in whispers. Patricia's eyes widened. Robert looked as if the floor had dropped beneath him. Vanessa's lawyer tried to hide his surprise, but I saw the calculation in his gaze. 5 million clean, guaranteed, versus years of litigation and uncertain outcomes. Daniel finally spoke, his voice breaking. Vanessa, did you marry me for love or for money? She opened her mouth, but no answer came. The silence spoke louder than any words could. I folded my hands. You have until noon in 3 days. After that, the offer disappears. And so will my patience. The deadline ticked down like the final seconds of a clock in a silent stadium. I expected resistance, threats, maybe even more legal maneuvers. Instead, at 11:47 a.m., on the third day, James's phone lit up. Marcus Webb's voice, on the other end, was clipped, resigned. My client accepts the settlement. By 5 o'clock, the paperwork was signed. $5 million wired into an account I would never look at again, and Vanessa Mitchell was gone. She disappeared from our lives with the same cold calculation she had entered them. No tearful apologies, no explanations, just a silence that echoed louder than all her polished words. Daniel filed for divorce within the week, citing irreconcilable differences. The Mitchell family retreated into their estate, their lights dimmer, their parties fewer. I did not celebrate their collapse. I simply closed that chapter with the relief of someone who had survived a storm. 6 months later, Daniel called one Sunday evening. His voice was lighter than it had been in years. Mom, he said, I've met someone. Her name was Claire. She taught literature at a community college outside Baltimore. When he told her his mother lived in a modest townhouse and drove a reliable car, she had smiled and said that sounded like a woman who had her priorities straight. I laughed, a real laugh this time, not the brittle sound I had used to mask the truth for so many years. She sounds perfect, I told him, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed the future could be simple again. That night I sat at my dining table, surrounded by the financial records that had once been my shield and my weapon. I thought of Michael, of the night he whispered that maybe his invention could change everything. He had been right, but neither of us imagined it would change me most of all. I realized something then. For 15 years, I had mistaken invisibility for safety. I thought hiding meant protecting. But privacy is not about disappearing. It is about choosing when to step forward, when to speak, when to defend what matters most. Wealth had given me armor, yes, but the true shield was always integrity, the values I fought to keep alive in my son, the resilience that carried me through widowhood, the quiet strength that finally refused to bow to manipulation. So when the sun slipped through my window and lit the pearls at my throat, I whispered the lesson to myself, as much a promise as a truth. You can hide from the world, but never from who you are. And sooner or later, that truth will rise, undeniable, unshakable, and free.